Hello everybody, I'm Silly. This will be part 2, chapter 2 of Through the Eyes of a Quirkless Child. It took a long moment for Deku to come back into consciousness, but when he did, he snapped to attention almost immediately. Honestly, it wasn't a great idea to be moving his head so fast when it still felt like someone was putting an immersion blender into the back of his skull on the highest setting. But Deku was never really one to make good decisions. He groaned quietly, opening his eyes and taking a long look around him. It seemed to be some sort of dingy bar, and it took longer than it should have for him to notice the villains sitting in a semicircle around him and various seats around the room. A woman who looked to be at least 25, wearing large sunglasses, was whispering to a girl no older than Deku in a slightly ripped school uniform. The Mist villain Deku recognized from the USJ was standing behind the bar, rubbing a cloth in the same spot on the counter over and over. Honestly, was that supposed to be a joke? Deku is unfortunately familiar with all the gamer references Shigaraki made during the USJ attack, but did he honestly make the Mist villain act like some sort of Skyrim NPC? And watching carefully as Shigaraki, sans creepy hands, drinks something out of a wine glass that looks an awful lot like Mountain Dew. There was someone with the lizard mutant quirk, and honestly, how cool is that? He wished he could ask about their quirk, especially considering the giant lump of knives and a vague sword shape next to them. But now isn't the time or place for that. Who seems to be partway through a very frustrating game of Go Fish, where a man in a dual-colored spandex suit kept yelling "Uno" at random intervals and throwing his cards at the lizard's eyes. The magician, who had tried to take Kachan, was seemingly asleep, leaning back casually in a booth next to the one with purple scars, who was currently in the process of trying to steal the magician's top hat without waking him up. He wasn't making much progress. Despite how many of the villains were directly facing him, they didn't seem to notice that he was awake yet. They carried on with their conversations, not even looking up at Deku. This was his chance. He still had the element of surprise on his side. He could still do this. In an instant, Deku had broken through the ropes tying him to a chair and was lunging at the patchwork villain. Just as his fist was about to make contact with that painfully smug face, a warp portal appeared before him. There was no time to react. His only choice was to hope that the Mist villain didn't drop him off on a roof and brace for impact. Luckily enough, he was just dropped on his face by the chair he was tied to before. He jumped to his feet, one for all humming through his veins with barely contained power. He looked from villain to villain before settling on rushing Shigaraki. "You really don't want to do that, brat," Shigaraki said, sounding bored, as if the whole situation was nothing more than a major pain in the neck. Deku, for all his intelligence, didn't even stop to consider Shigaraki's words as he lunged at the villain like a wild animal. Shigaraki whipped around to face him in a split second, grabbing onto his throat with 4 fingers and a tighter grip that was strictly necessary. "Are you gonna listen now? Or would you rather we just go back and kill a couple of those brats in training you seem to be so fond of?" That alone brought Deku to a standstill faster than the hand that was still closed around his neck. Carefully, Deku narrowed his eyes and shook his head. He wasn't about to go along with whatever the guy wanted, but he'd much rather be the one with the League. He could handle torture, starvation, whatever the League threw at him, but he couldn't say the same for a lot of his classmates. "Good. Now sit your ass back down in that chair and don't even think of trying something, or I'll have Kogiri take that gravity-canceling NPC you like next. I'd love to see what the doctor could do with a quirk like hers." Shigaraki laughed, letting go of Deku's neck with a shove. Thoughts of just what Shigaraki meant buzzed through Deku's mind. Was this doctor person capable of controlling someone else's quirk? Taking it? How painful would it be for the victim? It was terrifying to think about, and Deku absolutely did not want anyone to go through that if he had a say in it. So, for now, he would do what the League wanted, only until he found his way out, and maybe a way to take them down permanently, too. Deku sat in a chair about a foot away from the wall, which still had snapped ropes hanging off the back. Even if he was pretending to submit to the League of Villains, he didn't have to go down quietly. He leveled a dark glare at Shigaraki. For a moment, they were caught in what seemed to be a staring contest, trying to outglare and intimidate the other. With a sigh, Shigaraki blinked and stood from his spot at the bar. Putting his hands in his pockets, pinky finger curled in towards his palm, he sauntered up to the green-haired teen who still had refused to break his stare. "If you're done throwing a fit, let's begin, shall we?" Shigaraki bent down condescendingly, his face at eye level with Deku. Somehow, Deku's glare seemed to harden even further, his mouth twisted into a furious scowl. The hero and villain were nose to nose, neither quite willing to back down first. He still refused to say a word, but Shigaraki took his silence as an answer anyway. "Here's what we're gonna do, hero. I'll ask you questions, and you'll answer all of them in as much detail as you can. Sounds good?" Shigaraki tilted his head and gave a wide Cheshire grin, his skin cracking and peeling, blood pooling beneath the scars that had begun to pull apart. Deku hesitated for a moment. Obviously, they wanted to know about All Might, but Deku couldn't lead the League into killing the #1 hero. He had to protect the secret of One for All and, by extension, the symbol of peace himself. On the other hand, if he refused to say anything, what would they do to his friends? Shigaraki had already threatened to go right back to the training camp and take more students. He had just as much of an obligation to protect them as he did All Might. After a moment of thought, he leaned back and gave his response with a sigh. "I won't tell you anything, Shigaraki, and I won't let you hurt my classmates either. The heroes will find me, so let me go before you regret it." Deku's voice was rough from disuse, but his voice held an icy venom nonetheless. If he couldn't save everyone doing things the League's way, well, then he'd just have to do it his own way. Shigaraki sneered, but surprisingly didn't fight Deku on it. Instead, he stood up and began walking back to the bar. He shot a look at Kogiri and stepped through the portal that appeared. It was an uncomfortably long time until Shigaraki returned, and Deku spent that time using his analysis skills. He took careful note of every door, every boarded-up window, and began running through everything he knew so far. If they were going to give him time to think, time to plan, he was going to use it. He had no idea of knowing how many villains there were. He could be looking at a temporary alliance between the League and another, larger group, or he could be looking at every member of the League right now. He assumed not, though, because that would be beyond stupid. It would obviously be a stupid idea to have every member of your group in the same place as someone you kidnapped and are trying to interrogate, especially when that person has pro-heroes looking for him, symbol of peace included. The League couldn't be that stupid. Probably. He quietly did a full body check, looking for anything the League could have done to him while he was unconscious. All he found, however, was that his broken arms were healed and appeared to be in no worse state than they were before at that. His joints were sore, and he desperately needed to pop his back. But aside from that, he was seemingly in perfect health. What purpose did the League have for healing him? What could they possibly be planning, where keeping their victim in perfect health would benefit them? His brain began to filter through images of gruesome torture, healing him only to break him all over again. With a small shudder, he thought that he really didn't want that to be their plan. Maybe they just didn't want to deal with him whining about his broken arms, which he supposed was fair. His thoughts were interrupted by Shigaraki walking back into the bar, looking like a cat who got the cream. Hands clasped behind his back, the blue-haired man sauntered over to Deku with that same sick grin on his face. Shigaraki pulled a chair away from the nearby table, sitting on it backwards. Deku almost laughed. Is this how the League of Villains intimidated their victims? By looking like a boy band reject who got hit by a dust storm. Honestly, if this guy was the one in charge of the League, Deku had no reason to worry. "Since you aren't going to willingly tell us what we need to know, Sensei has taken the liberty of giving me a quirk to use that might help you become a little more forthcoming. You have one last chance to tell the truth, hero. Until I make you, that is." Shigaraki cackled, obviously very confident in his sensei and the abilities of this quirk. Confidence in a person like Shigaraki was almost never a good thing. "You think I would give any information to you willingly? You must be more stupid than you look, Shigaraki." Deku faked a smirk. hoping to at least break the villain's self-assuredness, if nothing else. Shigaraki just giggled again, not saying anything. Grabbing onto Deku's face with 2 fingers, squishing his cheeks together, Shigaraki stared straight into the hero's eyes. Nothing happened at first, until Shigaraki's eyes burned bright blue. Even then, Deku didn't notice the effects of the quirk until it was too late. Shigaraki moved to tie Deku's arms behind his back again before settling back in his seat. So tell me, hero, what do you know about Yue's weaknesses? Specifically, what can we use to break in? Deku's eyes widened with shock, and his mouth was moving before he could even think to stop it. I don't know much about Yue's weaknesses, probably because the staff suspects there's a traitor feeding you information about the school. So, for obvious reasons, they haven't offered up any information about the school at all since the USJ. What I do know, however, is that it would be ridiculously easy to break in. Deku was shaking his head, his arms straining against the rope, but he was too panicked to make any real use of One for All now. He spared a thought to the fact that the quirk being used on him must have some sort of common sense blocker, or something along those lines to make him not only offer up everything he knew, but also not even attempt to use his quirk to break free. Sure, it wasn't his best analysis, but it wasn't exactly his fault he couldn't think straight. If you want to break in, all you would have to do is steal an ID card from a student or staff member. It would be a suicide mission to try and take an ID from most of the staff, or any of the Hero Course students, obviously, but the Gen Ed and Business Course students are UA's biggest blind spot. They're given no self-defense training, no training of any kind, honestly. They usually aren't very smart either, aside from the Business Course students. UA is the top hero school, not the top high school. It would be all too easy to, say, bump into a Gen Ed first year, making them drop the contents of their backpack. You could help them pick up their things, swiping their ID card when they aren't looking. This was really, really bad. Those thoughts weren't ever supposed to be spoken out loud, much less to the League of Villains. From there, all you would have to do is walk them to the gates so their ID lets them in. And they wouldn't even notice until they tried leaving for the day. Because they got into the school grounds at the beginning of the day with no issues, they would assume that they lost it on campus. They would either be too ashamed to admit they lost their ID, or if they did, the search would only be on campus. From there, you would just have to wait a week or 2 until they get a new ID, and the whole situation would be forgotten about. If they lost the card on campus, the staff probably wouldn't bother deactivating the card either. They can be careless like that, especially when it doesn't concern the Hero Course students. By this point, Deku had begun to cry. No one was supposed to hear that. He hadn't even come to terms with the fact that those thoughts crossed his mind in the first place yet. But he had no control over his words now, especially what came next. Honestly, it would be much easier overall if you villains would just spend a little more time looking like not villains. Especially if you have an ID to get on campus. If you look like you're supposed to be there, no one will question you. The teachers and students are all so confident in UA's security that whatever bullshit excuse you came up with for being in the school, they would buy it on the spot. No one would suspect you, probably, not even in hindsight. I'm pretty sure Nezu leaves campus on Mondays and Thursdays to meet with the commission. So if you really want to make sure that you don't get caught, just break in on a Monday or Tuesday between 11:30 a.m. and 3:30 p.m. Finally, he stopped talking. He was near hyperventilating at this point, the collar of his shirt soaked with tears. The lizard quirk person in the back speaks up now. Hey, why didn't we think of that? He says, sounding almost upset that he didn't come up with the idea of himself. Any other time, Deku would have laughed at how childish he was. Shut up. It's not our fault the kid's a genius. He's so stupid. Even a toddler could think of that. The man in spandex shouts, far louder than he has any right to be, considering the serious tone of the situation. Shigaraki rolls his eyes, telling them all to shut up, so he can ask the brat more questions. Before he can ask another damning question, though, the schoolgirl begins speaking. But wait, Shiggy, there's no way he could have thought all of that up on the spot, no matter how smart he is. Izu's a hero, so why would he have a pre-made plan on how to break into UA? She asked, tilting her head to the side, looking like a confused puppy. It would have been endearing if not for the blood stains he could see on her clothes and the crazed look in her eyes. That's probably just a constant thing. Shigaraki's face seems to light up at this, even just a fraction. That's a good point, Toga. Would you like to share with us, Midoriya? I would personally love to know why All Might's golden child was thinking about legally breaking into not only the #1 hero school in the country, but also the very same school he currently attends. Shigaraki is practically shaking with excitement at this point, waiting with bated breath for whatever was going to come out of the brat's mouth next. Shigaraki scratches at his neck, the skin there turning red and irritated. Maybe this kid wants to be a villain. Sensei would definitely find that funny, the symbol of peace being betrayed by his own protege. Deku clenches his jaw desperately, his face turning purple from the strain. Shaking his head frantically, he looks like he's about to be sick or pass out. He curls towards his stomach, holding his mouth closed through extreme discomfort until he can't anymore. The words that were torn from his chest were jarring, said through gritted teeth and intermediate sobs. I made that plan as soon as I finished my first day at UA. I always wanted to be a vigilante hero, or at least from the time I was 10. Because I knew I needed a quirk if I wanted to be a pro hero. I thought maybe if I could still save people as a vigilante, even though I didn't have a quirk. After the practical exam, I knew someday I would have to destroy the school from the inside out if I wanted to make the world a better place. I made the plan so I could get in, save my friends, and take down UA. Alright everybody, that concludes Part 2, Chapter 2 of Through the Eyes of a Quirkless Child. Please make sure to join the Discord if you haven't already, if you would like to get updates easier, get connected with people within the fanfiction community, make requests for a podfic, and more. The link to the server will be in the description. Now I hope you enjoyed, and thank you for listening.